Everybody, my name is Emily Miller. I am the Director of Training and Client Care, talking to you from Chicago. It's beautiful out today. A nice cool breeze here, and I hope it's nice by you as well. We're also joined by Paige Crawford, who is the Wyoming Program Director, and Matt Forbkansky, who is a training specialist here out of Chicago as well at ACES. So we're going to start by looking at the EVV mobile app CellTrack, including how to register for employees and how to clock in and out for employees. We'll also talk about how and when to use IVR, the EVV, Electronic Visit Verification Landline, how to edit time for employees and how employers approve that time. We'll look at some resources available to you, take time for questions and answers. And if anybody here is part of or provides group service or receives group service, that only applies to the comprehensive and supports waiver, we have a small section at the end that applies to you. All right, so let's dive in. Let's start with CellTrack, the mobile EVV application, on how to register. So if you need any support on how to download the EVV mobile application, we do have a user guide that talks about how to download this directly to your smartphone, your smart device. And once it's been downloaded, the worker, the employee, is going to be the one that registers. Now, an employee can only be registered to one device at a time. Now, that device can have multiple workers on it, for an example, but the employee can only be registered to one at a time. So if you're an employee and you're registered right now and then you get a new phone, congrats, that's wonderful. Go ahead, give us a call and we'll reset that device so you can register on your new device. All right, so employees, how do you register? Well, first you're going to open up CellTrack on your device, and it's going to ask you for a license ID and authentication code. So if you provide individual service, you only provide individual service. You do not provide group service. You maybe don't even know what that is. That's okay too. If you provide individual service, you're going to use the individual service license ID and authentication code. The individual service license ID is 200591. Again, that's 200591. And the individual service authentication code is 121896. Again, that's 121896. Now, if you provide group service and individual service, even if you only provide group service once in a blue moon, once a month, or once a week, you're going to use the group service license ID and authentication code. Now, group service is going to allow you to do both individual and group, so it's very important you do group service if you provide group service. Now, the group service license ID is 200595, and that's 200595. And the group service authentication code is 259467. Okay, that's 259467. All right. And these are also included, these codes, in the user guides as well on how to register. It does ask for a phone number, but that's completely optional. And if you're on a tablet or smart, an iPad, for example, there's typically no phone number associated with those, and that's okay. So these codes help tell CellTrack what program, this is the Wyoming Self-Direction Program. Okay. Now, the next screen is, okay, we know you're in Wyoming. Now, who are you? What is the employee's user ID and last name? So your employee user ID is 5 digits. It's all numbers, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, for example. It is unique to each employee, and it can be found on the dashboard of ACES Online. So when you log in, the employee logs into ACES Online, you will see that there's an EVV user ID right on your dashboard. You can also, of course, contact ACES, and we will be able to provide that to you after you validate your identity. So employees enter their employee ID and their last name. Okay. So now we know this is for Wyoming. We know who the employee is. Okay, employee, let's create a password, answer security questions, and finish registration. So password needs to be entered twice. And it's always encouraged to be complex and unique, so no one else can break into that account. Of course, passwords are case sensitive. Next, that employee needs to select and answer 2 different security questions. They cannot be the same security question twice. The answer can be anything. It's not case sensitive. Okay, whatever your answer works. And then you'll click register button, the register user button. Okay. If for some reason you're registered on another device, maybe you're not known to the system or there's some type of issue, this is when you might get a pop-up. And if you're not sure what that means, just contact ACES or Participant Care Services, and we will be able to coach you through and research what is going on. Now, once that employee registers, they'll be able to see all the participants linked to them. So it's one registration for the employee and all the participants they serve will appear. All right, so now the employee has registered. It is time to clock in. It's time for your shift to begin. Now, the way electronic visit verification works is when your shift begins, you clock in. When your shift ends, you clock out. So if you start the shift at a laundromat, if you started driving your participant somewhere, if you start it at the participant's home, whenever your shift begins, that's when you're going to clock in. Whenever your shift ends, that's when you're going to clock out. So let's take a look at employees, how you start and finish a shift. Now, the helicopter perspective is that the employee logs into CellTrack, clocks in, selects the participant they're delivering services to, and then they select the service that they are providing, as applicable. Okay, so that might not pop up depending on the waiver of the participant. And then that employee would start their shift. So let's take a look at each step. The first step is to log in. So after you've downloaded the CellTrack mobile application, the employee has registered, right? The employee is able to clock in for their first shift. So you can tap the CellTrack icon on your screen to open it up. And this is what the login screen looks like right here on the right. So the hardest part might be remembering your password, right? We're human, we've all had that happen before. If you forget your password, you can click on Forgot Password. And then you'll be prompted to enter an answer to your security questions. Okay. And if you get those correct, you'll be able to reset your password. But it's time to clock in. We remember our password. So we are going to go to the next screen and tap Clock In. Now, what you're looking at on the top right here, I like to highlight this, is the home screen. And I like to highlight, now for individual service, if you see the Clock In button, that means you are not actively clocked in for a shift. Okay? Your shift has not begun. So if you're working, you process. Once you tap Clock In, which participant are you delivering services to? You might only serve one participant, or you might serve multiple. You'll select from the list and then advance to the next screen. Now the bottom right corner, the blue arrow, that's what typically advances you to the next screen. Now, as applicable, only the services that you are able to provide will appear. So if you only provide long-term care, this screen itself will not appear. There's only one service code option, so this entire screen will not appear. But for some of you, that might mean you skip this. And you go right to Start Shift. So you tap Clock In, you select the participant. If needed, you select the service, and then you tap Start. Now, this is when the shift begins. This is when location is captured per the Federal 21st Century CARES Act so you can begin your shift and deliver services. From here, you can close your phone, you can turn it off. There is absolutely no need to leave CellTrack on or open on your device. Okay. So let's fast forward. We've clocked in, we've provided our shift, our services. It's now time to clock out. Our day is finished, or at least this shift is finished. So to start, you want to log back into CellTrack. So whether you are connected to the internet or cell phone reception or not, whether you're at the person's home, wherever you end your shift as agreed upon between the employee and the employer, it's time to clock out. Your login, you just select at least one task that was provided. then review and provide signatures. If the employer is available, they can sign off right then and there. If they're not, that's okay. They can do it later in Access Online. And next, they would confirm and clock out. So to log in, we're back at that same login screen. You can log right in. And if you do have, Face ID or fingerprint on your phone, you can also set that up when you register for the first time, but that will not be available if you share this device with other employees. Now, before you can clock out, you do need to select the tasks that were provided. So you're going to tap on Wyoming tasks here. Notice there's a little red asterisk, a little red circle next to it because they have not been selected yet. Next, you select the tasks that were provided, and you're going to tap the bottom right arrow to keep those selections. Now, perfect. So we've selected the tasks. Now it's time to review the shift to make sure it looks correct and clock out. So we can see the start time, the finish time, and look, in this case, the duration is only 3 minutes. So this is a good opportunity to highlight that we follow the Department of Labor. So if you clock in between 4 o'clock and 4:07 and 30 seconds or less, you will be rounded down to 4 o'clock. If you clock in between 4:07 and 31 seconds to 4:14, it's going to round up to 4:15. So that's home and you completely forgot, oh my goodness, I forgot to clock out, right? I'm sitting on the couch, I'm eating my ice cream, and I realize I'm still clocked in. So when that happens, the time as reported by EVV for this shift need to be adjusted. So you want to check the box that says yes, because yes, we need to adjust the time and the date. Because the employer and employee, you should never sign off on something if it does not look correct. So if you need to adjust the time, the current pay period are not accepted. So it must be within the current pay period, the 1st to the 15th or 16th to the end of the month. So notice here, it asks you, do you need to adjust the start time or the end time? So in this case, we'll say we're going to adjust the start. Maybe I got to work and I'm working, I'm supporting the participant, and then I realized I forgot, my phone in the car. So I can adjust the start date, the start time, and I must select a reason for making that adjustment. You want to make sure it's adjusted so it reflects the services and the time spent actually working. All right, so if needed, you've made your adjustments. The next step, the employee is always going to sign off on your own shift. Okay? But if the employer is available, you have to go into Access Online later. If the employer is available, they can scroll up, review the information, and sign off on that shift. If the employer is not available, that's okay, because they can just go into Access Online later and approve or reject those shifts in Access Online. So if their employer is not available, it will switch to no. They would select no and enter a reason why. The employer might be in the shower, they might be taking the dog to the vet, they might be at the grocery store. They might live across town. It's a plethora of reasons an employer may not be available, and that's understood. Now, that being said, it's very important that no one but the employer can sign off on, can approve, or reject time. That is solely the role of the employer. I want to stress, it's the sole responsibility of the employer to verify that services have been provided and to sign off on the EVV shifts before they are submitted to Access for payment. If the employee, participant, if the participant is not the employer, of course, an authorized representative, a case manager, any other member of the household who is not the employer signs off on an EVV shift, it is considered fraudulent submission. So it is fraud. And that can result in one or more of the following actions. It could be non-payment of the submitted shifts. It could be removal from the participant direction program, both the employer, employee, or both. And it could also result in potential legal action. So I hope that clears up the roles very clearly. Now, to actually sign off on the shift, you press the pencil box, the little pencil button. And if you've ever used a finger or stylus, however you engage with a touch screen, you can do so to provide your signature. And if you don't like your penmanship, you can use the eraser to erase it, or if it looks good, you can use the check mark, and that'll keep the signature. Once everything looks good, it's time to clock out. It is time to press OK, right? So we've pressed the check mark, and that's the final question. Are you sure you want to clock out? Are you sure you want to finish? And the answer is yes, right? The shift is done, so you can press OK. After that, you're brought back to the home screen where you can clock in again for another shift or a different participant, whatever your day looks like for you. So that's how to use the SalTrack mobile EVV app. Now we do have user guides available and videos in English and Spanish on our website, which I'll show you those as well, how to find those. With regard to IVR, how to use IVR, that's the interactive voice response, the landline EVV. So this should really be only used if an employee does not have a smartphone or smart device. That employee can use a participant or employer's smartphone or device, but of course it's the employee who registers and actively clocks in and clocks out to use it. So if needed, let's say somebody does not have a smartphone or device, they can use the IVR. Now the way the IVR works is the employee shows up to the participant's home and places a call from the landline, the participant's landline from the home phone we have on file. Again, the IVR is only available in the event the mobile solution is not an option. So if you've ever called your bank and you speak to an automated teller, press 1 for your checking account balance, press 2 for your savings account balance. It works in a very similar fashion. Now the first step is to place a call from the participant's landline telephone. If the employee is calling from the participant's home, that system's typically going to recognize the phone number or participant. But let's say the employee is calling from a hotel phone, a pay phone, a cell phone, a phone number not associated with the participant's landline telephone. They will technically be able to clock in and clock out, but it will not be EVV compliant. Okay? So that's important to be aware of. So maybe if you're going on vacation, you don't have a smart device, and you're accompanying the participant, that could be done, but that should not be the norm. That should not be the day-to-day operation. So next, you need to authenticate your identity. So the employee, you need to put in your employee ID. That's that same 5-digit ID I mentioned earlier. It's not the last 5 of a social. It is all numbers, and it appears on the ACES Online dashboard at all times. So if you ever forget it, you can log into ACES Online to see that. And you can also contact us. We'll be able to provide that to you after you authenticate your identity. So you put in your 5-digit employee ID followed by pound, and then the employee needs to put in their PIN. And if you're wondering, I don't know my PIN, I wasn't given that. You're right, you need to contact ACES to get that 4-digit PIN. Such a small population uses IVR that it was not sent out to everybody. So if you will be using IVR, please contact ACES and we can provide that to you. Next, you'll select the participant from the list. Then you'll select the service type. Again, it may or may not be required depending on the participant and the waiver. And then you're going to confirm the start of the activity. You're going to clock in. You'll press 1 to do so, and then you'll be able to hang up. So you make a phone call, put your ID, your PIN, select the participant you're about to deliver services to. If needed, select the service type, and then clock in. Now fast forward, your shift is over. It's time to place a second call. You're going to call again from the participant's landline telephone. You'll enter in your 5-digit employee ID again and your 4-digit PIN. It's going to say, welcome back, Emily. Now please enter task codes. And so you enter the task codes performed during the shift, and then to conclude the call, you'll follow the prompts. If the employee wants to clock in again for a different service code, they can follow the IVR prompts. So employees can clock in using the SalTrack mobile EVV app at the time the shift begins and then ends. If needed, they can adjust it before clocking out. Okay. And employees can also use the IVR if they do not have a smartphone or smart device. Now, employers, let's talk about how you approve time. So employers, again, you are the only ones who can approve time. So after an employee clocks out, the employer can approve shifts in essentially two areas. First is if an employee uses CellTrack. Well, the employee can essentially clock out and then hand the device over to the employer, who would sign off on that shift if they are available. So during clock out, the employer and employee both sign off. Now again, never approve, never sign off on something if it does not look correct. If it requires an edit, do not sign off, and it'll go over to Access Online. The employer can reject that time. And then that allows the employee to make edits. Now, I mentioned again, so the employer can approve or reject pending shifts in the Access Online portal. That also applies for time submitted via IVR. So for IVR, the employee can, they place their call, and upon clock out, they can hand the phone over to the employer during the same call. That employer is going to verify their identity and approve or reject any shifts that are pending their attention. The second way is that the IVR system can actually make an outbound call to the employer. So let's say the employee clocks in, and when they clock out, they press the prompt that will make an automated call go to the employer. If the employer answers, they can validate their identity, and then all the shifts pending their attention will be read to them. And let's say the employer can't sleep, it's 2 a.m., they say, hey, let me approve some shifts. They can actually place their own call to the IVR confirmation number, verify their identity, and then approve or reject any shifts pending their attention. Now, for both CellTrack and shifts submitted via IVR, all of that flows into Access Online. It can be viewed in Access Online, it can be managed in Access Online. Any shift that is pending the employer's attention, meaning it's not yet been approved by them, can be approved or rejected. Again, you should never approve time unless it looks accurate. Once it's sent for approval to Access, we're going to do our best to process that and reach out unless there's any actions needed. So let's say that we process time and find it does not follow a program rule, so an adjustment needs to be made. Or let's say the employer does not approve it, instead they reject a shift. Well, that employee needs to make edits. Employees are the ones who make edits to shifts in Access Online. Now, the way that's done, the employee is going to log into Access Online, which is at login.mysil.org. On the left toolbar, you'll see electronic visits. And when that's clicked, below it, a submenu appears, and you'll see Edit EVV Visits. So you'll click on that, select the participant, the year, and the pay period, and then search. And that's going to bring up all the different shifts. You'll see statuses for the shift, and those that can be edited will have buttons that appear. So you can adjust the time in, the time out, the dates, the service type, and tasks as you see fit. The employee then needs to make a reason for the adjustment and confirm those changes. And then they need to submit those to the employer. So let's take a look. So here you can see the top line. We see it's grayed out, the time in, the date in, the locations. Now they're not present here because it was not EVV compliant, manually entered in the portal, the Access Online portal. But see, there's 3 buttons here: edit, submit, and reject. So the employee would tap on edit, and then all of these boxes can now be adjusted. The date in, the date out, time in, time out, adjustments, service code, and tasks. Then the employee should save those changes. And notice you can see here the status is unconfirmed. So that needs to be saved and submitted to the employer. Take a look at that. So once it's been saved, we can either reject it ourselves as the employee or submit it to our employer. So of course, Access cannot press this time unless it's been approved by an employer. So you're going to check the box saying, I am the employee, I am who I say I am, and then submit that to the employer. Now, after an employee submits time, the employer needs to review those changes and approve or reject it. Okay. Once an employer approves time, whether it's in CellTrack, the IVR, or ACES Online, that shift cannot be edited. So again, it's very important to only approve time if it looks correct. So employers, how do you do that? How do you approve or reject shifts in ACES Online? So you're going to go to the same place, login.mycell.org. You're going to log in, and you're the employer, so you cannot edit time. You can only approve or reject time pending your attention. So when you click on electronic visits, you'll see that it is pending. You want to see what shifts are pending your attention. You'll narrow that down by the employee, the year, and the pay period to bring up those shifts, and select the shifts that need approval. You can review that information and approve or reject as needed. So this is what that looks like. So if the status of a shift is pending, that means it's pending the employer's attention, which means the employer needs to approve or reject it. If something does not look right, that can be rejected and sent back to the employee for edits and resubmission. So employers, you can approve shifts one at a time, or you can approve them all or reject them all at once. You do need to make sure that the employer checks that box to make sure that is the attestation of truth box. Again, we have guides that go through these steps in detail, and you can always contact Participant Care Services. But there's one point I really want to make sure is clear. So EVV shift submission and payment. Time will only be accepted and paid out for the current or 2 previous pay periods. If there's extenuating circumstances, maybe an employee gets COVID-19, is hospitalized, or unable to submit updated time for 45 days when released from the hospital, the state can review as requested and potentially approve on a case-by-case basis. As I mentioned earlier, and I think it's important to loop back to this, EVV time is tracked in real time, right? You clock in when your shift begins, you clock out when your shift ends. And then it is converted into 15-minute increments for payment. You're paid in 15-minute increments. So ACES rounds time based on the Department of Labor guidelines. So as I mentioned here, and I think it's nice to have this visual, hope that helps. If you clock in between 7 o'clock a.m. and 7:07 a.m. and 30 seconds, it's going to round down to 7 o'clock. But if you clock in between 7:07 and 31 seconds and 7:15, that's going to round up to 7:15. Okay. So essentially, if you're 7 minutes and 30 seconds past a 15-minute increment, it'll round down. If you are 7 minutes and 31 seconds past a 15-minute increment, it's going to round up. Now, if you're a visual learner like me, this might be online portal. So let's just start, in looking at the left side of this chart here. So how does this work? You clock in and clock out when your shifts begin and end with the CellTrack mobile app. Let's say you clock in and you realize, oops, I clocked in at the wrong time, right? And so you're still clocked in. You can edit that shift before it's submitted to the employer. So you can adjust time, as we saw earlier, adjust the start time, the end time. Your phone was on the fritz, it didn't work. But so today you've got your phone back. You can technically add a shift in CellTrack for the current pay period. You clock in and clock out, and adjust the time to reflect the shift that was forgotten. Now, employers using CellTrack, you can approve time in CellTrack at the time of clock out. So the employee clocks in on that finished visit screen where they're clocking out, they sign off and can hand it over to you. And if everything looks accurate, that employer can sign off on that time. ACES Online, you can also submit forgotten shifts or edit rejected shifts. Okay, so your employer rejects a shift, you're going to need to go into app. You can approve or reject any shifts that are pending your attention. All right, so let's say employers, you approve all that time. It comes to ACES, we process it, we find, you know what, it's gone over a budget or some program rule is not followed. So it requires adjustment to be processed. We are going to unlock the timesheet. You'll see it as a delete status. Okay, and you're going to go and you'll be able to, the employee will log in, edit, and submit shifts based on the employer's directions. Okay. So whatever adjustments need to be made, that employee should do so at the employer's direction. And then the employer, if everything looks correct, would approve those shifts. Again, this is all in Access Online. And then once Access receives that time back, we will process again that time. If adjustments are needed again, we would unlock it and that process would start over. The employee would. So I hope that's helpful. Then is an exception shift. Now, a valid EVV shift captures 6 elements: the date, the time, the type, the service recipient, so the participant, the service provider, the employee, and the location. The location at the time of clock in and the location at the time of clock out. An exception is a shift that is missing one of those elements above. Okay, most commonly the location. Now, an exception is not compliant with EVV requirements. So those shifts can still be paid, but it should be avoided because it could result in required training or additional review as required by the state. So edits should really only be made when necessary. You don't want to make it your common practice. So how do you make valid EVV shifts? You clock in and clock out at the time your shift begins and ends using CellTrack, and you avoid making edits while clocking out. Another valid EVV shift is clocking in and out with the IVR system by calling from the participant's landline telephone. Now, a shift becomes an exception when an edit is made to a shift using CellTrack during that clock out, or you're editing a shift in the Access Online portal. In the Access Online portal, you press the green plus button and you manually enter a shift directly into the portal. There's no location capture there, so that is not going to be compliant. And let's say you clock in or clock out by calling the IVR system from a payphone or a cell phone, essentially not the participant's landline phone. That would also result in an exception. So now we know life happens, but it's important not to make this your default or your, how you always clock in or clock out. All right, we've covered a lot of content together. Let's talk about what resources are available to you after this training. So if you contact Participant Care Services or download, find resources at mysil.org on the Access Wyoming page or the training page, we have landline instructions for the EVV IVR system. We have instructions available. We also have a recording of this training, and we are offering monthly training as well. So if you'd like to hear this content again or you have questions, please use the questions function. That's why we're here. And you'll notice as well that Matt has been chatting out different YouTube links for particular sections of this training. So the next portion of this training covers group service. So if you serve multiple participants in a group setting under the Comprehensive or Supports waiver, this applies to you, so you should stay on. If you do not provide group service, that concludes the training. If you have questions, please do reach out. Please make sure you confirm your attendance if you did not register. Okay. So if you provide group service, you serve multiple participants in a group setting within the Comprehensive or Supports waiver. This presentation content applies to you. So let's move forward. Now for group service, the goal is to be able to clock in for more than one participant at a time, because you serve more than one participant at a time. So you register using the group service license ID and authentication code. You open up CellTrack. What you want to do first is you want to clock in for the first participant. And after you clock in, you'll clock in for the second participant. So you'll see here's the home screen. And there's something that looks just a smidge different with group service that I'll highlight for you here. You notice it says My Activities. And here we actually see that there's one activity scheduled for today. That just means you're currently clocked in with one participant already. So you can click here on View All, and then you'll be able to clock in using this clock in button for the second participant. But if you're not clocked in for a participant already, you can simply tap Clock In to be able to clock in. So you can tap Clock In here, If it's individual, you will choose individual and do all the same instructions we mentioned earlier. In this case, it's group service. We're working with 2 or more participants at a time. So we're going to choose this service type to advance to the next screen. So here we are with Mary. I'm going to tap the start to clock the first participant. Okay. So notice here, we can enter our tasks at any time, at the beginning of the shift, during, or at the end. Started, I see the start time, and I see this pause button here in the top right corner. Let's talk about that. So to clock in for another participant does not stop time from recording. It simply allows the employee to switch between screens to clock in time. So again, the pause button simply allows you to move between screens. You will still be clocked in for that first participant, Mary Jones. So we've clocked in for Mary Jones. Let's pause. And that brings us to the next screen here. You want to tap clock in. So it says paused next to Mary's name here, right here. Okay, so we can move down and we can tap the clock in button. All right, so we're going to follow the same instructions as before. So we're going to clock in for the second participant that we're serving. So group service. So started our shift for the second participant. So we're clocked in for marks now. I can enter at the time of clock out, but I do need to select tasks before I'm able to clock out. So if I want to view both participants or clock in for a third person, I'm going to tap pause again. And here I can see both Mark and Mary are present, and I can tap clock in for a third if I need. Okay, so we know how to clock in for multiple participants. How do we now, Mark's name, I tap on finish or resume. If I have not done so already, I do need to enter my tasks. It'll turn green. So I select the tasks that were provided. In the bottom right corner, I'm going to tap the arrow to keep that selection. And now see next to Wyoming, I've got a green check mark because I've selected my tasks. Okay, same instruction. Then I get that one in and out accordingly. So to switch between a participant, what you need to do is tap on that and then tap on finish or resume, right? When a shift is paused, it can be resumed or finished at any time. It does not stop time from being recorded. It simply allows you to switch between screens. Okay, so to switch between screens, switch between participants, you tap on their name, then you can edit tasks. Or of course, you can clock in for a third participant as needed. Well, I hope this has been helpful to you. You can always contact Participant Care Services if there's any way we can support you. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Stay well, and thanks again for joining.